Transforming your life with hypnotherapy just got easier with your host, Julie from CoachingHypnosis.net.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Coaching Hypnosis. Over our last few episodes, we've looked at the massive egos of the mid-century celebrity doctors and the private violations of rogue practitioners. But in all of those cases, there was always a shadow of doubt in the legal system, a lingering debate where hypnosis ended and where the victim's own volition began. Today, we're looking at the absolute holy grail of forensic hypnosis. We are stepping into a courtroom that didn't just debate the theoretical limits of mind control, they codified it into legal history. Today, we break down the definitive, chilling case of the 1951 Copenhagen hypnosis murders. To the average person, the idea that you can hypnotize someone to walk into a bank, pull out a firearm, shoot two completely innocent clerks, and hand the cash over to a third party sounds like a plot of a trashy B movie. For decades, standard clinical wisdom has confidently repeated the comforting mantra, a person cannot be hypnotized to do something that violates their core moral code. It's a lovely, reassuring sentiment that lets practitioners sleep at night. But Bjørn Schouw Nielsen didn't read that brochure. Operating from the grey concrete isolation of a Danish prison cell, Nielsen spent months systemically dismantling the psyche of a fellow inmate named Palle Hardrup. He didn't just use a shiny pendulum or a quick verbal trick. He used a multi-layered cocktail of mysticism, yoga, extreme ideological radicalization, and deep, repetitive trance conditioning to create a literal, real-world sleeper agent. When Hardrup walked into that Copenhagen bank in March of 1951 and opened fire, his finger pulled the trigger, but the Danish Supreme Court ruled that the mind behind the sights belonged entirely to Bjørn Schouw Nielsen. Today, we decode the cold, terrifying mechanics of institutional psychological rewrite. To understand how this nightmare unfolded, you have to look at the pressure cooker where it was engineered. Following World War II, Bjørn Schouw Nielsen and Palle Hardrup were serving sentences for collaboration and treason at Horsens State Prison. Nielsen was older, highly intellectual, intensely charismatic, and deeply well-read in Eastern philosophy, yoga, and hypnosis. Hardrup was younger, deeply insecure, impressionable, and looking for a savior. It was the perfect, tragic storm of a predator and prey. Locked in the same cell, Nielsen began running a highly sophisticated daily protocol of psychological erosion. He began by teaching Hardrup deep relaxation and yoga techniques under the guise of helping him survive the stress of confinement. Once he had conditioned Hardrup's nervous system to enter deep, somnambulistic trance states at a moment's notice, Nielsen altered the script. He didn't just give commands, he built an entirely new spiritual and political reality inside Hardrup's brain. He convinced Hardrup that he was being contacted by a literal guardian spirit or divine entity that required him to form a radical new political party to save Denmark. And conveniently, that guardian spirit spoke with the exact same cadence, commands, and vocal triggers of Bjørn Schouw Nielsen. By the time both men were released, Hardrup was completely untethered from his own identity. On March 29, 1951, acting on explicit, deeply embedded hypnotic commands, Hardrup walked into the Cerebro branch of the landman Spanken. When the robbery went sideways, Hardrup didn't panic like a normal criminal. He operated with cold, detached automation of a machine, shooting the cashier and branch manager dead before calmly riding away on a bicycle that belonged to Nielsen. Phase 1. Institutional isolation. Leverage the high stress, closed environment of a prison cell to become the exclusive source of comfort, guidance, and psychological stability. Phase 2, somnambulistic conditioning. Use daily yoga and deep relaxation training to bypass the critical faculty, conditioning the subject's brain to drop into deep trance instantly. Phase 3, the guardian spirit override. Externalize the source of hypnotic commands by framing them as divine entity, completely removing the subject's personal moral agency. Let's look at the absolute sarcastic audacity of Nelson's defense strategy when the house of cards collapsed. Hardrup was caught immediately and within months of intense psychiatric observation by Dr. Paul Rewriter, the psychological dams break. Hardrup confesses, explicitly identifying Nelson as the guardian spirit who programmed the entire operation. Nelson actually stands up in court and tries to play the ultimate casual innocent bystander card. Hey, I just taught the kids some breathing exercises and talked about philosophy. Is it my fault he turned it into an imaginary friend and went on a shooting spree? It is the absolute peak of sociopathic gaslighting. He genuinely believed that because he wasn't the only one physically holding the gun in the bank, the legal system would be too primitive to trace the individual neural threads connecting his mouth to Hardrup's index finger. He thought he had engineered the perfect liability-free crime, but the Danish judiciary brought in the country's top psychiatric minds, ran exhaustive trance susceptibility testing, and proved that Nelson had essentially turned Hardrup into a flesh and blood remote-controlled drone. In a landmark verdict that shocked the international legal community, Hardrup was sent to a psychiatric facility and Nelson was handed a life sentence for murder without ever stepping foot inside the bank. As professional strategists and modern hypnotists, we have to look past the historical sensationalism of this case to analyse the specific, terrifying clinical mechanics Nelson used, because it shatters the myth that hypnosis is always harmless. He achieved total compliance by weaponizing 3 specific psychological levers: the captivity proximity effect. Hypnotic suggestibility increases exponentially when the subject is under chronic stress and isolated from competing inputs. By operating inside a prison cell, Nelson became the absolute arbiter of Hardrup's reality, completely starving his default mode network of any grounding outside perspectives, the externalized agency loop. Nelson understood that if he told Hardrup, "I want to kill someone," Hardrup's conscious ego would rebel. By creating the persona of a guardian spirit, Nelson bypassed the moral gatekeeper entirely. Hardrup wasn't committing a crime. He was fulfilling a divine cosmic directive handed down by a higher power, the cumulative somnambulistic anchor. This wasn't a one-time street trance. This was a systematic multi-year compounding installation. By running deep trance inductions day after day, week after week, Nelson carved out deep neural pathways of automatic obedience, making the execution of the final command feel as natural and as inevitable as Hardruper's breathing. Bjørn Schouw Nielsen's life sentence was upheld by the Danish Supreme Court, and even the European Court of Human Rights ultimately verified the integrity of the verdict. He proved to the world that while the subconscious mind is a spectacular engine of self-actualization, if it is systemically farmed by a predatory psychopath in a closed environment, it can be weaponized to override the most fundamental human instinct, the preservation of life. The profound lingering lesson of the Copenhagen hypnosis murders is a visceral reminder that your mind belongs entirely to you, and the second you allow an external voice, a charismatic authority, or a toxic environment to dictate what is real, what is moral, or what you're capable of, you are surrendering your sacred asset. An ethical coach, consultant, or clinical hypnotist will never try to install their own agenda, create a dependency, or speak to you as an external god. True, unshakable guidance is about waking you up to your own absolute awake sovereignty and sharpening your own executive power. If you've realised that you're operating under the heavy weight of a collective programming, or if you've been letting high-pressure environments and external authorities dictate how you run your business, your career and your life, it's time to step out of the cell and reclaim your own present authority. If you're ready to clear that cognitive noise, drop the weight, and lead your business with a completely independent, unburdened mind, I invite you to book your free 40-minute clarity call. Together, we'll dismantle the external noise, stabilize your nervous system in absolute reality, and install a powerful, unshakable subconscious identity focused entirely on your true, present sovereign power. Remember, aligned subconscious plus healed history equals unshakable leadership. Thank you for listening. Align your mind, visualize your future, grow your business. Mindfully yours, Julie.